Clayton King has been with me before, and we had a great time talking about very interesting things like bear hunting and stuff like that. But more seriously, we talked about one of his books where he talks about this paradox of giving up your life in order to find it. He talked about his wife quite a bit, as you may recall in that interview. And so we figured it's time to have Clayton back with his wife and their latest book called 12 Questions to Ask Before You Marry. Welcome, Charie.
Thank you.
Are you happy to be here?
I am. We've been to Canada once already, and we loved it.
Oh, you know, it's interesting, Clayton, you mentioned in another one of your books, which we'll be highlighting in a future interview, that Canada is mysterious to many Americans. Why is that?
I think Canada is enough like America that we feel an affinity towards our Canadian brothers and sisters, but we don't really understand hockey.
Right.
We don't understand and it's so big. I think that most Americans look at Canada as this big, vast wilderness, and they don't realize that there are great cities like Toronto and Quebec and even where we just recently were in Vancouver.
Oh, sure.
But we love Canada. We just took a vacation with our family and spent a week on Vancouver Island, and had a blast.
Yeah, well, it's good to have you here, and at least you're trying to understand Canada. A lot of Americans just figure they don't know much about Mexico, they don't know much about Canada, you know, and that's why it's legitimate to say to some, at least Americans, I think you live in the biggest island in the world.
Exactly, exactly, I agree.
12 questions to ask before you marry. Now, we can't get through all the 12 questions, but as I was reading the book, before you even mentioned it, I thought one question that has to be asked before you marry is, what are your expectations? And sure enough, that's chapter 7 in your book. Have you communicated your expectations? What are we talking about here, Charie?
Expectations as far as, what are you wanting in a husband? What are you wanting in a wife? What are you wanting out of marriage? Do you want to have children? Do you not want to have children? Are you career-based? You know, all of those things are scary to talk about sometimes when you're afraid you're going to lose someone if you disagree over it. But we've talked about how it's much easier to go through those questions before marriage than to get married and then to realize you never talked about it.
But you raise a very important point. You don't want to lose this person.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're sort of in a salesman mode. You're selling yourself,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And it's pretty easy to fudge, isn't it, on some of these things?
It is, but would you want to sell someone else on something that's not real? Yeah. And then when you get in the marriage, you've kind of not meant to lie, but you're stuck in a marriage and not really knowing the person. And I think that's what a lot of our chapters are about. Tell the truth. Tell about who you are. Be honest with one another. And if you get to the end of that and you love each other and you can make it work, then get married. But don't, put on a facade at the beginning just to win someone, and then you're married to someone you didn't really know.
But Clayton, there's so many dating sites now on the internet and opportunities to hitch up with somebody. People are desperate for a meaningful relationship. Mm-hmm. How is it possible, when that's your driving, motivating force, to be brutally frank and honest with somebody when you fear that honesty is going to result in rejection?
Well, you're totally right. God wired human beings to connect in relationships. Yeah. Marriage is that most intimate and should be most lifelong of all relationships. So when you meet someone that you are interested in, you want to put your best foot forward. You're, like you said, you're kind of trying to sell yourself. Yeah. Yeah. It's in many ways almost like test driving a car. Yeah. You want to make sure this is what I want. But the long-term approach is a much more healthy way to look at marriage. Not just, can I get this person to fall in love with me? Mm-hmm. Not just asking the question, what do I have to do to land this relationship? The bigger question is, are we compatible for the long run? Are we going in the same direction? Do we want the same things out of life? And if we want to have a lifelong marriage that's going to actually last, then we have to be honest about who we are, where we're heading, the things that we want to get out of life. One of the things that we found as we were writing the book and doing the research, and then 25 years of ministry that I've been involved in, is that many people don't even think about those issues before they get married. They tie the knot based solely on this subjective idea of being in love. Mm. But if you dig a little deeper and you ask tougher questions, what does it even mean to fall in love? We make this statement in the book. Anyone can fall in love, but can you walk in love? Falling in love is accidental. Walking in love is deliberate. And so marriage is not about falling in love. Marriage is about walking in love day in, day out for years and decades. And that's the ultimate goal. So if you ask the right questions before you tie the knot, there's a much better chance that knot will stay intact over the long haul.
You are on a pastoral team that's overseeing a major congregation. What, about 20,000 people altogether?
Yeah, our church at New Spring has 9 campuses with over 20,000 people.
Yeah. So you are faced with the realities of people living life on a major scale. Why the high rate of divorce in your perspective? I'm sure one of the reasons you're writing the book is so that people don't end up divorced. But why is it that relationships seem to be failing? Is it because they're not communicating expectations, not asking the 12 questions?
It's a big question. There are so many subtle nuances that should be discussed when we talk about why divorce is so prevalent. I hate to paint with a broad stroke, but I would say, to simplify a very complex issue, I think our Western culture is very me-focused. People are very self-centered, myself included. I think we have a romanticized idea of what marriage and love and romance will look like. And I think many people find out shortly after they tie the knot that the honeymoon phase doesn't last forever. You've got to learn to get along. You have to learn to work together. You have to learn to live in a home together where you share a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen. When children are born, it's no longer just about you and your dreams. It now becomes about them and raising them to be good citizens of the world. And so I think that there are lots of surprises that people haven't banked on, that people haven't prepared for. And in a westernized culture that esteems the individual above the community, or the individual's rights and happiness above the family unit, divorce seems to be a very easy option when things get tough. It's just easier to walk away than it is to really buckle down and do the hard work. Marriage is hard work. We say this in the book. Marriage is for grown-ups. So if you want to get married, grow up.
Well, you know, that occurred to me as I was reading your book, that when you're talking about these are questions that mature people ask, not questions that immature people ask. Immature people have no idea what they're getting into. And I'm wondering, is it possible when you're 19 or 20 or 21 or 22 years of age to even have the capacity to ask these kinds of questions?
Well, that was our dream in writing the book. And we didn't get together and get married and say, oh, let's write a book about marriage now that we're married. We just started traveling around and ministering, and we started noticing that people kept asking us how we had such a good marriage, how we loved each other so much. And when it became something that we just felt like we were telling people everywhere we went, we thought, what have we done? You know, how did we do this? And I remember when I first met Clayton, I felt like he was testing me. One of the first questions he said to me, or statements, was, I'm in ministry, I'm going to travel all over the world, and if you're not okay with that, I guess you're just going to have to jump off the ship, you know? And I remember another time he said to me, we were walking down the driveway just taking a walk as a dating couple from the house he just bought. He said, what if I lose everything? What are you going to do? Are you going to leave me? Are you going to, you know? And I said, well, then I guess we'll lose everything together and just walk down the road, whatever road we have. And so we had hard questions from the beginning. And this guy is just so good at confronting things that are hard. And I think I was a little more hesitant, but when we brought out the hard issues, we knew who we were when we were getting married. And so we wanted to be able to say, this is a book that I think people who are married still need to ask themselves if they didn't think about them before. People who may have been divorced and they're getting married again and they want it to work this time. These are hard questions, but I feel like people are getting married very immature now, and they need to grow up a little bit before they make a lifelong commitment. And we're not used to lifelong commitments. We're used to, you know, see if this works for a little while. And I've been in a marriage that's been through multiple divorces. I didn't even know if I thought that marriage could last. And I think that's where a lot of people are. They get in marriage, they don't know if it can last. When it gets hard, they're like, well, this didn't last either. And they give up because they think, I couldn't do it, obviously, you know?
You said you were a part of a marriage? What, as a child growing up?
As a child. My mom was married 3 times. My dad was married 3 times.
So were you a little gun shy when it came to the idea of marrying Clayton?
I had hope that marriage could work, but to be honest, in college, I was ready to to go be a missionary or just have a career. But I had a campus minister who I lived with for about 6 months, and I watched his family work, his wife and his kids, and I watched their family, and I saw the Lord use them, and it gave me hope that I could have that too. And when I watched them, I said, Lord, will you give me this too? Can you give me that hope? Can I have this as well? Because I just wasn't really sure that marriage was going to work for me. I was just going to follow the Lord, and if it plopped down and the Lord gave it to me, then I was going to grab it.
What was your first disappointment with this guy?
You can tell the truth.
Oh, come on.
She always tells the truth.
Yeah, no, I didn't warn you, but what was number one disappointment with Clayton?
I think, and I think he was actually disappointed with the same thing. When I found out that he had dated a girl before me for 4 years, and they were very serious, and, when we dated, I kept saying, well, what's better about me than her? Why wouldn't you go back to her? Because she started calling our house, she had a wreck, and he had a wreck and wanted to know if he's okay. I'm like, why is this girl calling our house? So,
why is he taking the call?
I know.
I only took one, and that was over.
And then I said, this isn't working.
Sure of it. Yeah.
And I had actually been engaged before him. So that was...
that was my disappointment.
Yeah.
He was a loser.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. He was not a loser. He was a great guy.
It just wasn't right. And I listened to my family. They were concerned for me.
What was your first fight about?
Well, for us, the biggest fight we had during our dating and engagement phase of life was my schedule. I travel.
Yeah.
I think the year that we were married, I traveled over 300 days that year. And she traveled with me once we were married.
But before that,
I was preaching at churches, youth rallies, missions conferences. I was going to India 3 or 4 times a year. I was leading teams of college students, and so the schedule was a source of contention for us. And that's one of the things that we talk about in the book. You've got to learn how to communicate. I did not want to hear her say, I need you to be here more. In order for us to have a relationship, we've got to be home together more. I just wanted to kind of keep on doing my own thing. And one of the things that we learned early on is a marriage is not about 2 single people who come together as roommates pursuing their individual dreams. A marriage, according to God's word, is where 2 people become one flesh.
Become joined at the hip.
Yeah. And what we did in the book is we took the 12 biggest issues that all of the experts tell us cause a divorce. Everything from money to lack of communication to family issues to expectations. We take those, even sex and intimacy, we take those 12 biggest issues and we frame every one of those in the form of a question. And these are the 12 questions that you should ask either before you're married or as early in your marriage as you possibly can so that they don't sideswipe you.
Now, one of the questions, and it's another chapter in the book, is the business of marrying a family. Mm-hmm. You're not just marrying an individual.
Right.
You're marrying a history. You're marrying a culture or a subculture. The King family. Mm-hmm. It has its own little entity, mm-hmm. And that's not always apparent to couples who are deeply in love. That one day they're going to have to go to Aunt Emma's mm-hmm. for Thanksgiving, and if they don't, they're going to hear about it. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. This was something that we had to deal with. Mm-hmm. She's from Atlanta. She's a big city girl. I'm from a small southern town in South Carolina. And just as an example, when we first started dating, she would come home with me for Thanksgiving dinner or for Christmas. And my family, their southern accent was so pronounced and so deep. I mean, just imagine the most unbelievably undecipherable southern accent. My family would begin talking and telling stories and jokes, and she would literally say, "Can you tell me what they're talking about?"
I would smile and just do this and say, "What are they saying?"
You need the interpretation.
Yes,
she had no idea what they were talking about.
His great aunt asked me my name, and I told her about 5 times, and she said, "Show what? Well, I don't think I'll ever say that." And I just didn't know what to say.
It's true.
So that was Atlanta, I'm from Atlanta, and as much as Georgia is southern, Atlanta is not quite as southern. Right. So when I first met his family, I really didn't understand them. There were stories they told that I didn't know. were funny and I was supposed to laugh, I would just listen to him laugh and laugh too, or smile.
Now, what about you now? Who do you relate to when her parents have been divorced, remarried 3 times each? I mean, have you got this huge extended family, or do you just kind of focus on 1 or 2 people?
You know, for me, my mom and dad have both recently died within the last 2 years. My parents were together for 46 years. I come from a more traditional, conservative culture, the Deep South, where church and church attendance was the dominant force in culture. So for me, I never, ever thought about divorce. When I grew up with my parents, divorce was never mentioned. It was never an option. You worked on marriage. You fixed your problems. You kept it very private. You went to your pastor. You went to some folks that could help you. So when we went into marriage together, we made this promise. We will never, ever discuss divorce. It'll never be an option. And only by the grace of God, but by the grace of God, we are making a commitment. We're making a vow. And so for me, I've been able to go back to my parents' example of staying committed through very difficult times, very hard financial times, very difficult times health-wise. Both of my parents died in their late 60s. Both of them had tremendous health issues, but watching them care for one another and love each other. So for me, they set a great example. For her, she saw divorce and in many ways was affected by it because of the divorce that took place with her mom, her dad, her stepdads. And she had a taste of what divorce would look like and decided, by God's grace, I'll not go there either.
And to be fair, my grandparents were married until my granddaddy died, over 50 years, you know, and I have aunts and uncles who are still married. So there were good examples there. It just maybe wasn't quite immediate. And he enjoys, I have a large family.
Yeah.
I have my mom, and then she has 5 brothers and sisters. So it's fun that we still have that, and his mom and dad have died. And so that, you know, we get to go home for Christmas or Thanksgiving, and there's a crowd of people, grandkids, great-grandkids, so.
But it really is an extended family, and a blended one, too.
Yeah.
You always marry a family. Someone told me recently when they got engaged, and I said, well, what do you think about her family? Have you met her mom and dad? Oh, yeah. He said, they're crazy. They're all crazy. High maintenance, addicted to drama. They're all in debt. And then he said this comment, but I'm not marrying her family. And I stopped him. I said, oh, buddy, yes, you are.
You are, yeah.
You are marrying her family. You marry the entire package.
Yeah.
And you'll find that out later on in marriage if you're not.
We got a minute, and Moira will never forgive me. Tell me the latest Jack Bauer story.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a great example. I wanted to tie this in with marriage. In marriage, you got to work together.
Right.
We're a team. We're partners. She's my best friend. Recently, I was preaching at a very large event, and my phone was stolen from my Bible cover backstage. I have an iPhone. I used to have a Droid, and then I gave my life to Christ and was forgiven of my sins, and now I have an iPhone 4S. My iPhone was stolen. We used her phone to track my iPhone, to find my iPhone.
You had an app.
Yes, we had an app.
Yeah.
We could actually watch my phone move from a satellite image.
Right.
We found my phone 2 miles away from the church where I was preaching, tracked the guy down, 10:30 at night, found him in the dark, chased him.
I had a flashlight.
She had a flashlight. Chased him.
The 2 of you are chasing him?
Yeah, well, I chased him until I got to the woods, and I had heels on, so I stopped.
Yes, she had to stop at the edge of the woods. So the guy runs through a parking lot, down a sidewalk, into the woods while I'm yelling and screaming, stop, thief, in Jesus' name, give me my phone. So he threw my phone. I guess I frightened him. He threw my phone into the woods, and using her Find My iPhone app on her iPhone, I found my phone and was able to recover it.
A little vigilante justice.
Well,
It takes two.
There's a couple who are working together. The book's called 12 Questions to Ask Before You Marry. One of the questions is, do you have an iPhone? The e-store makes it available, friends, and you can log on to crossroads.ca or call 1-800-265-3100 and order your copy of 12 Questions to Ask Before You Marry. And it really is a good read, and it's good stuff. It's just the kind of stuff that you want your kids who are getting married to read. And we'll be hearing more from Clayton sometime in the future.